Please remove your hat for the singing of the National Anthem, performed tonight by Miss Britney Holmes.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched, were so gallantly streaming. And the rockets' red glare, their bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the So now that I've got your attention, I want to give you a perspective you may or may not have had regarding the national anthem. But first, let me introduce you to the Kevin Powell. I am here with the incredible, legendary Kevin Powell, who
Oh my gosh.
no,
Thank
seriously, who is a civil and human rights activist, poet, journalist, and author of 14 books, including his new title, When We Free the World, and it's a collection of essays about the present and future of America. Hi!
You're a great singer. Love your voice.
Thank you so much.
I'm actually a huge Bruno Mars fan too, just for the record.
Oh, well, me too.
No, I was watching your videos.
So, first of all, thank you so much for
Thank you.
doing this. I felt like you were the right person that I needed to talk to about this whole issue of the national anthem. So I'm super, super grateful to be speaking with you.
It's my honor. You're a great artist. I've enjoyed learning about you. And I realize I've seen you on American Idol, so there's that, and I love your family. You have a beautiful family, and I've definitely been to Dallas many, many times, all over Texas actually. So it's good to someone from the Big D. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. So this is Kevin Powell, y'all, and I'm super excited and grateful to be speaking with him about this issue of the national anthem and whether we should consider retiring it as America's national anthem. The whole reason why I wanted to speak to you about this and how this whole thing came about was that I recorded a version of the national anthem. And for people who don't know, the national anthem started my career. I started singing the national anthem when I was, just 9 years old, and worked my way up all throughout Dallas, singing for the Dallas Mavericks and the Dallas Stars, the Texas Rangers, Big 12 championship conference game. And it really started my career in music. And I was discovered by Mark Cuban, who flew me to Florida, and then I got a record deal at 11 years old. So really before this week, pretty much. I was holding on to the national anthem with a little bit of a sentimental value, I guess you could say, because of my own history with singing it and how I got started in music, and I love music. But until I started researching it, it just, once I learned of the history of the national anthem, it doesn't align with my morals and values and what I stand for. So for someone who's been crowned, the national anthem queen here in Dallas,
she's known as the National Anthem Queen. Here comes Britney Holmes.
Until things change, I don't feel comfortable singing it. And this is coming from someone who's biracial. My dad is Black and my mom is white. As a biracial young woman, I've seen the clear divide of how African Americans are not treated equal. And we're not on the same playing field. In my experience, although biracial is, I feel, one of a Black woman because I don't look white. So nowhere I go am I treated like a white person. So let's just kind of get your stance on the national anthem and why or why not should we think about retiring it?
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for reaching out to me. When I saw how serious you were about this, I just was kind of I said to myself, well, I need to have a conversation with her. If this is what she wants to do, then let's do it. And when I found out, a bit about your background, as I said, I was very impressed. I think you're a great artist. I hope that you and your voice will go many places because you have a very unique gift. I just want to say that first and foremost to you, as someone who has, is a writer, and I was a music journalist for many, many years. So I have a great appreciation for great voices. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that means a lot. Thank you so much.
But, think about what you just said to start it off. I want to start where we are now and go backwards. You said that your mother's white, your father's Black. Think about the fact that someone like Francis Scott Key, who wrote the poem that became the national anthem, someone who was born into a wealthy slaveholding family who owned slaves himself and who supported slavery and was anti-abolitionist and actually locked up a lot of folks who tried to end slavery, both white folks and Black folks. That's someone who would have been opposed to your mother and father being married.
Absolutely.
And we know up until, just a couple of decades ago, Black folks and white folks in pretty much the entire country could not get married because of the racial laws in America, which is rooted in the so-called founding of this country. So when we talk about the national anthem or any institution, what I always say to people as someone who is not just a writer, but I'm a voracious reader. I read a lot, and I've read a lot since I was a kid. Once I began to read history very differently, because the history that I got growing up, kindergarten through the 12th grade, was just whitewash. It was sugarcoating it. It was just leaving a whole bunch of stuff out. We learned nothing about Black people, about Latinx people, about Asian people, about Native American people. We didn't learn anything about women of any race or culture. We didn't learn about the queer community. We didn't learn about disabled people. We didn't learn about poor people. It was always focused on white men as being heroic for the most part, Columbus and Washington, et cetera. And so Francis Scott Key actually fits into that because when you think about what we were taught, how he watched this battle between the British and the Americans in 1814, and he wrote this poem over the course of 25 hours, what was left out of it, I didn't learn it 2 years later, is that, yes, he was born into a slaveholding family, and yes, he owned slaves. Right. And even in the song, there's actually 4 verses to the poem, but the 3rd verse is conveniently left out of it, which is actually, if we could put it in the language of today, of hip hop, he disses Black people who were escaped slaves who were actually fighting with the British against the Americans. Why were they fighting with the British against the Americans? Because they wanted freedom for Black folks who were enslaved. At the time that the national anthem was actually written, 15% of the American population were slaves. 15%. I want us to think about that for a second. That's a tremendous amount of people. And we know that was 1814, and slavery legally would not end until 1865. We're talking 51 years later. And so when you think about the national anthem, I also think about the fact that in the 90s, when Quincy Jones started Vibe magazine, and I had the honor of being one of the staff writers for that publication, writing cover stories on people like Tupac Shakur and Snoop Dogg and other folks like that. one of the biggest criticisms of hip hop from everyone, oh, it's violent, it's violent, it's violent. Well, the national anthem, bombs bursting in air, that's violence. Celebrating it, you know what I mean? And so what's the difference? And this is something that we who grew up in hip hop and had to defend the culture, said to people like, well, the national anthem is violent. Now, I wouldn't say to you at all that you should or should not sing the song. That's your own personal decision. I don't believe in telling people what to do. What I will say is there are examples like what Marvin Gaye did with the national anthem at the 1983 All-Star game for the National Basketball Association, where he made the song his song. There's examples of Whitney Houston at the Super Bowl making the song her song. And I think that, people who are woke, whether they are white or black or biracial, multicultural, that, if they're woke, they'll figure out ways. Jimi Hendrix playing the national anthem at Woodstock on his guitar. People hated it, but he was like, I'm going to interpret the national anthem the way I see fit through the lens of which I come. So I think that's going to be your personal choice. I would never tell you what to do. I just say, I don't sing the song, but I'm also not a singer.
Right. Yeah, I knew that the song was racist as a singer. I knew that the song was racist. I wasn't aware of all of the verses. I thought that we had just cut out the racist verses and that it would be okay. And I think a lot of people are uneducated in that aspect of, well, we just cut out the racist parts and it makes it okay. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I know a lot of people, like myself, just this week after doing so much research on the history of Francis Scott Key and the history of the song and the meaning of the lyrics, a lot of people have that mindset. Well, we took all the racist stuff out and we're not living in times of slavery anymore. So what's the big deal? So what would be your response to people who have that idea?
Well, it's just like I said in the beginning, your beautiful mother and your beautiful father, up until the 60s and early 70s in many parts of America, could not get married because of the color of their skin being different. And so, yeah, we took down signs like for colors only, for whites only. But the real issue we're talking about is a mindset that has permeated our country from the very beginning. This country was founded on the genocide of Native American people, indigenous people. We call them Indians. We were told lies, mythologies. I live in New York City. I live in Brooklyn. We were told that the Native Americans just gave Manhattan Island for $26 in trinkets, which is absolutely absurd. The land was stolen. The land was stolen. And we know the Native Americans were killed off. And we know that Black people who were brought from Africa, African people were brought here as slaves, for the sake of argument, and forgive the sounds of New York in the background, but for the sake of argument, 1619 to 1865, that's 246 years of slavery, free labor that built the economic infrastructure of this country. And so how did we control the slaves? And how did we control white folks so that they would not also join with Black folks and fight against slavery? It's called pop culture. It's called entertainment. It's called poetry, like the national anthem, which became the Star Spangled Banner. It's called the minstrel shows that were created in the 1800s, where to this day you still see white brothers and sisters wearing blackface. The fact that people like Tina Fey has had to condemn her own TV show, 30 Rock, just in the last week. The fact that Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, and other folks have had to admit to the fact that they wore blackface. Well, why did they wear blackface? Just the reason why Francis Scott Key wrote about Black people in the national anthem, because they had to promote the notion that Black people were inferior, that there was something wrong with these Black people. They were somehow subhuman. And the best way to do that is to diss them or to mock them in song, in music, in cartoons, in entertainment in general. And so it's embedded in our culture. And so when people say, well, this is part of our tradition, well, lynching was a part of our tradition. If you look at photos of lynchings, you'll see a whole bunch of white men generally standing around, some with their children, as if they're at the Super Bowl, as if they're at a Cowboys game. The Cowboys playing my New York Giants, for example. And it's the same kind of mentality, and they're cheering it on, but there's a Black man or two or three hanging from a tree, dead. And so, we don't even realize how we unwittingly Aunt Jemima's pancakes, Uncle Ben's rice. Guess my family's from South Carolina, and my grandmother and grandfather were called aunt and uncle by the white folks in the community because they didn't have enough respect for older Black people to call them Mr. or Ms., so they referred to them as uncle and aunt. Here we are eating the pancakes and eating the rice. We don't even realize how it's in every part of society. Football teams, the Redskins, baseball teams, the Indians, the Braves. I mean, I can go on and on and on about this, it's racist. And for folks who can't understand it, imagine if the same thing was done to folks who are Italian. Well, actually, it has been, because since The Godfather 1 and 2 came out, two of the greatest movies ever in American history, there have actually been over 7,000 movies and TV shows depicting Italian people as mafia. You know what I mean? And so racism in any form, hatred and bigotry and ignorance in any form should not be accepted. You're a woman. This is the last thing I'll say. Just like I learned nothing about Black people K through 12 growing up, you know what I learned about women growing up K through 12? In math, in science, in history, in English, social studies? Maybe 5 women in total in 13 years. Think about the sexism that you deal with as a woman in the industry and the mindset of us men, because we've been miseducated to think that you all are not our equals, which you are.
Absolutely.
Same thing with racism.
Absolutely. Another thing that I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on, up until this whole week, actually, ever since I recorded the song, I've been back and forth on whether or not I wanted to put it out, because I knew especially after researching, I was like, wow, this song is racist. And I would never want to offend or add more pain to my community. And I also didn't want to discredit the slaves that have built this country, or the African-American people who have fought for this country under the flag, under the national anthem. So what are your thoughts on that? Because that was a big struggle for me, really until I read your article in Yahoo. I was really kind of torn, and I know some people may feel the same way. So what would be your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, Miss Holmes, Britney Holmes, Miss Holmes, you are a critical thinker, which I really admire about you. And you're a seeker, which is what we need in this country. We got over 300 million people in this country. And there's a word that you've used over and over again just in these few minutes. I read, I read, I read, I read. Part of the problem is that a lot of us, and I can say this as someone who's not just a writer, but I'm an activist. I've been an organizer for many years in so many different spaces, but I've also actually been to all 50 states in this country, all the major cities, small towns, rural areas, places people have never heard of. And the common thread I've seen amongst people, white, Black, Latinx, Asian, Native American, a lot of folks don't know basic American history. And so when we don't know basic American history, we will lump everything together and say, well, if you don't stand for the national anthem, if you don't sing the national anthem, if you don't pledge allegiance to the flag, then you're un-American and you're unpatriotic and you should get out of here. For example, I've gotten messages from people, since that Yahoo article you're referencing, say, well, you should just get the F out of here. People have said that to me. I mean, I've been told my entire adult life, just go back to Africa. I'm like, well, I'm American. Just like Colin Kaepernick, who's half Black, half white, biracial, raised by a white family in, the Midwest, made a conscious decision at a certain point that this is unacceptable because I identify because of my skin color, as a Black person, even though I know I'm half Black, half white, but the reality is that I can go through the same things that these Black folks are going through. So I'm Black, politically, culturally, however he wants to lay it out. And people started saying that he was un-American and he was disrespecting veterans. Well, my response is, who has been more patriotic than Black folks in American history? We literally have fought in every single war. In fact, this documented proof of Black soldiers coming back from wars like World War I and being hung from trees in their uniforms. Black soldiers coming back from World War II and having more freedom and opportunity in places overseas like France than they did back when they came back to America. And so I think that it's disingenuous for people to say that somehow someone's un-American or unpatriotic. Here's the national anthem. Here's the Pledge of Allegiance. And don't even get me started on the Pledge of Allegiance, because people don't even know that the Pledge of Allegiance was actually written by someone who was a socialist. You know what I mean? And words like God were dropped in there about 50, 60 years after the Pledge of Allegiance was written in the 1890s. How do I know this? Just like you, I read. You know what I'm saying, Ms. Holmes? I said, let me actually find out where this stuff is, because otherwise we just become robots or parakeets repeating what's been given to us. And that's not who we are as human beings. We have a responsibility. Real education means that you think critically, you think outside the box, you ask questions again and again and again. And, no, I always say, if someone says, I served in the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, thank you for the service. Most of my family members, many of my family members, pardon me, have been in the military. You know, I was Army ROTC my first year in college. You know, I wanted to be a second lieutenant. So you can't tell me that we somehow have this disrespect for the military. That's not what this is about. You know, and as angry as people get about people saying, well, I don't want to support the Star Spangled Banner or the Pledge of Allegiance or the flag, yet you don't see the same anger when George Floyd has an officer with his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds as he's saying, I can't breathe, and mama, calling for his mama until he's dead. And so we're saying that a song or a Pledge of Allegiance or a flag is actually more important than Black people, which is basically saying the same thing the founding fathers, quote unquote, said when they created the Constitution. In the Constitution, the language is still there that Black folks are 3/5 of a human being. And so it's disingenuous. If you really love your country, if you really are patriotic, then you would question, why isn't everyone treated equally?
Correct. Absolutely. So that's my whole stance is, you know, once I did more digging on this song, it's glorifying and perpetuating ideas that we're trying to fight and that we've been trying to fight and end. And I just can't stand for that, you know. And a lot of people are like, well, it's tradition, and we're doing it. Why stop doing what we've always done? And I feel like, well, if we're only doing it for the sake of tradition, but the tradition is glorifying and perpetuating an idea that America boasts that we're not about. You know, we're all about equality, land of the free, home of the brave, and that everyone is equal. But if this song is literally in so many ways, just the meaning behind it, who wrote it, is against that, then why do we continue to sing it or have it just in the sake of tradition? Why not start something new? Or I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what your thoughts are on how to proceed, because
Right.
so many people are like, well, you're tearing down America by, taking these statues, and, you want to get rid of the flag, or you want to change the flag, and you want to change the national anthem, or, retire it and have something new. I, as a half Black and half white young woman, I feel like, and one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to you, and I felt so strongly about it, was to encourage people of all colors to embrace change and to start questioning why they feel the way they feel. Where are these thoughts and ideas coming from? Because so much is perpetuated in the media as well. You can have a white boy go into a church and shoot up a bunch of people, and then you can have a Black boy do the same thing, and the two stories in the news are framed completely differently. And people start to adopt these ideas, watching TV, and what they see and what images are depicted constantly. So I mean, like you said, it's just ingrained kind of everywhere. But I challenge, because I see a very distinct difference in the treatment of Black people versus white people. And it's very clear to see. And I don't deny either one of my sides.
And you
But
should.
I see how it is extremely unjust and unequal. And if I can be any kind of symbol of, bridging that gap and bringing people together to think on more of a unity, level, I guess you could say, then that's what I seek to do. And I feel like, a lot of people may be upset with me singing the national anthem as a Black woman. And the whole point of me singing the national anthem was to get people's attention. And most people don't know about the history of the national anthem. They don't, like you said, they don't know American history, the correct version of American history. And so my goal in this call and this and singing this song was to get people's attention, to bring them to this moment right now of being a little more educated and offering a perspective that they may not have seen before.
I think, Brittany, we and I are in the same place. We believe in love. We haven't used that word in this conversation yet, but we believe in love. You know, we believe, I love all people. I don't care what your background is, and I believe that you do too, you know. And we want to bring people together, you know, and ways to do it. But I think about Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. I have a little bit of different interpretation of it than a lot of people do. But that part where he says Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics will join hands and sing in the words of the Negro spiritual. Think about that for a second. He said he calls out certain groups of people, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, the Negro spiritual. What he's saying is know who you are as you come to the table of the human family, the human race. So if you're Jewish, if you're Italian, if you're Mexican, if you're Puerto Rican, if you're African American, if you're West Indian, if you're Scandinavian, no matter what your background is, be clear who you are. If you're biracial, if you're multicultural, what is in you? What do you bring to this table? And then you also have the courage to have those kind of cultural exchanges, that conversation, the conversation that we're doing right here, and that you're suggesting we need to happen. That's what's been missing in America the entire time. It's almost like we're afraid. And so Black people over here, white folks over there, men over here, women over there, straight people over here, queer folks over here, able, disabled. I mean, we can go down a list of stuff. You know, people are unwilling. We just allow ourselves to be pitted against ourselves and each other and just gets perpetuated from generation to generation. I think what's happening right now is very different than anything I've ever seen in my lifetime. I mean, I'm in the generation ahead of you. You're a millennial, I'm a Generation Xer, but I can tell you, even when I became woke, as we say now, back in the 80s and into the 90s, you never saw the massive levels of protests out there, people with different backgrounds. This has been incredible, not since the 60s, not since the 1960s. You've never seen people questioning, you know, statues, monuments, the national anthem, everything. I mean, just remember, it was just 4 years ago that half Black, half white brother named Colin Kaepernick, you know, took a knee and he was lambasted. And we know he has not been able to play football since then. Now, 4 years later, people are saying, you know what? Colin Kaepernick was right about this. Yeah, he was right about it. Just like Muhammad Ali was right about the Vietnam War and they lambasted him back in the 60s. You know, and so what you're doing and what I'm doing is saying, let's have the courage to have the conversations. When you said correct education, I would add to that, Brittany, I want us to have an education that's actually holistic. Like you're an artist, for example, art should be a part of everyone's education, period. You know what I mean? Not just the stuff that we're talking about where you just get a few figures and that's it. I mean, how do you go to school and not learn about classical music, about jazz, about, you know, all these great art forms that we've created that clearly runs through your veins, which has led to your great voice. You know what I mean? You being a great artist. And so that's my challenge to people. You know, don't think that you've been fully educated. All the stuff we see happen, even the responses to the pandemic, and you're taking our rights away by making us wear masks. I'm going to say it like this very simply. We lost 291,000 people in war, in World War II. You know what I mean? At the rate we're going, with people thinking this is about taking our freedoms away, we're going to lose more Americans to the pandemic because of all these divisions that we're talking about, all the ignorance that's out there. It's the same mindset. You know what I mean? People fighting each other. I mean, it really comes back to, do you really love yourself and do you love other people? Do you love your fellow Americans? If you did, you'd want to care for folks and make sure they don't get sick. And if someone raises a question about the national anthem as you're doing, you know, I think it's a very patriotic question. You know, hey, how can we be better here? Right. Can we do something different? Right. And people can't say, I'm going to just say this last thing, Ms. Holmes, people can't say that we haven't done this before because many of the state songs, including in places like Kentucky, those songs were actually minstrel songs that were the state songs that had the most disrespectful terms for Black people, words like darky in them. People can look it up, the Kentucky state song. But at some point, they realized we need to change this because this is not fair to Black people. It's the same thing with the national anthem.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Powell, I really
Holmes.
appreciate your time, your knowledge, your wisdom, your experience. I am beyond grateful, and I truly, truly hope and encourage people to read and seek more information and more knowledge. And you are a great source of that, because it would not have brought me to you and all of the information that I've read that you have given. I can't wait to check out your new book.
Just say this again. I think you should do what you feel as an artist. I think artists have that right. Um, I just am glad that you have decided to have this conversation, because a lot of folks wouldn't even have the courage to have it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
Have a blessed day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.